I can't lie, I like cool links. Some other devs may deny, but those guys are boring and I enjoy fun. Inspired by this growing trend of massively over-engineering links, we're going to make this component, which I scrapped together the other day. We'll use React, TailwindCSS, and Framer Motion. We'll cover some stuff that we've covered before, like use Spring and use Transform, as well as some stuff that we haven't covered before, like staggerChildren. I don't think we need any more intro than that. Let's write some code. So I'm in a bare bones React project over here. I'm using Next.js for my project, but if you're using Create React App or whatever you might be using, that's totally fine. Because of that, I'm not going to go over some of the specifics of hooking up Tailwind CSS, which you will need hooked up for this project to work, because it might be different dependent on what framework you're using or whatever you may be using. But just know that you're going to have Tailwind CSS hooked up. You're going to have to install the Framer Motion package, and you're also probably going to want to install the React Icons package if you want to follow me exactly. That just looks like this. You can also totally just ignore the piece where I use that icon or use your own icon, whatever however you want to handle that problem is totally up to you. But if you want to go one-to-one, just make sure that you've installed these two packages right here. Really quick shout out, if you want to just grab the code, all of it's available on my website. You can just go under links. The link for this website will be in the description. But you can just grab all the code for this from here, come over to this toggle up here, and you can grab it in either JavaScript or TypeScript. Just click on that. If you want to come over here to reference how all of this works, you can totally do that. Or if you just want to grab the code and drop it in your project, you can do that as well. There's a bunch of other cool stuff in here that you can check out. I won't take too much time on it here, but if you want to learn more about how to build cool animated UI components with Tailwind and Framer Motion, that is literally all that you're going to find in here. So pretty cool resource if this is something that you're interested in. Anyways, let's write some code. So I'm going to try and get through the styling piece relatively quickly, just because that's relatively straightforward and not the fun part. But I do want to actually walk through it a little bit more slowly than I normally do, because I've gotten some comments from people saying like, hey man, slow down a little bit, which is hard for me. I talk quickly, but I'm going to do my best. And I'm already off to a bad start by jumping directly in and not saying what I'm doing. So on this wrapping section that I have here, I just have, again, a bare bones React component. And on this wrapping section right here, I am just going to give it some background color. The one that I used for my last version was background neutral 950. I'm also going to add some padding. So we'll say padding of 4. And as I go through all of this, I'm going to also add the I can't think of the word, the responsive styles kind of as I go. So for this one, I want a padding of 4 on small screens. And then when you get up to medium-sized screens, like the medium breakpoint, I'm going to increase that to a padding of 8. So pretty straightforward. Now we have a little black bar at the top. Sweet. Inside of this section, I'm going to add another div. This div is going to be the wrapper around all of our links. And the main purpose of this div is just so we can set a max width on all of our links and give it a margin auto so all of our links kind of stay in the center of the screen after a certain point. So just add that really quick and then show you what I mean. I'll say class name MX auto, and that's going to give us a margin left and a margin right of auto, and then give it a max width, which for my last version, I used 5XL, which is 1024 pixels. Nothing specific, it's just kind of what I picked. And to show you what this is doing, I'll just add a background of white and some padding. You could ignore this piece really quick. Now you see our kind of bar right here, but as this gets bigger beyond a certain point, it's not going to grow any further, and that's going to stay in the middle of the screen. So simple enough, basic CSS stuff. Go ahead and remove those last two classes. Now that's all of the styling really on this outer wrapping section. I'm gonna go ahead and make a new component. I'll just call it link like this, and this can just, this can just return pretty much nothing right now. We'll just return a div. There we go. And each of these links are obviously just going to represent each one of these individual links. So like this whole component here would be one link. This whole component here would be the next link. So if you kind of think about it, how I had it laid out before, this is going to need to take in a couple of props. It's probably going to need to take in an image source for this image right here. It's going to need to take in some kind of heading, some kind of subheading. And then it's also going to need to take in the href for the link, so where we actually want to send the link to. So before I actually write all the styles for this, we can go ahead and just define all of those props for this link. I'm just going to destructure them in my props like this, instead of directly defining props and then doing them separately. So destructuring my props, I will say heading, subheading, say, what else did I say? I wanted an image source and I wanted an href, and those are going to be all of my props. Also, let me make this bigger because now I cannot see anything. Sweet. Okay, so that is going to be all of the links that I want. I'm gonna go ahead and just drop the links that I've already defined before in, so we can kind of see this come together. You can copy all of these. You'll probably need your own images. You can use an image of any size. But again, we're just defining all of our links. So this is going to be one, my prop for heading. I'm adding this text. Subheading, I'm adding this text. I already have some images in my project. I'm not going to go over the specifics about how that's set up or where I'm storing those, just because you might not be also using Next.js, but you could also just use, an Unsplash, an Unsplash image or whatever it might be. So whatever images you want. And then for all the hrefs, I'm just sending them to an empty hash. And obviously you're not going to see anything different just yet. If we want to make sure we're actually seeing something, I can go ahead and take this heading. I'll just go like this, and now we should see some stuff. Cool, kind of hard to see, but now we have some content. Awesome. I'm actually going to undo that piece. And first of all, I want a link. I don't want a div, so I'm going to change this to an a tag, and I can pass in this href for each of these. So I can say href is equal to whatever we're passing in here, and that's a pretty good start. Now at least we have a link, and there's going to be a whole bunch of styling we're actually going to add to this in just a second. But before I go ahead and do all of that, let's actually just add all of our content first and foremost. So inside of our a tag, I'm going to add a div. There's going to be some flexing that's going on here. So this kind of content on the left that's about like this heading, and the subheading will be inside of one div, like one section. The image is going to be absolutely positioned. So where that sits in the flow doesn't really matter. But then our content over here is going to be in another div, and those are going to be flexed between each other. So that's kind of what we're laying out right now. That said, in this first div right here, I'll just put everything in a span. So we'll say span tag, and then I want to add our heading, and then below that, I also want to add, our subheading. Nice, okay, no, now it's fixed. Now we have some text, awesome. And I am going to ignore doing the image right now because that piece is going to be a little bit more complicated. So I'll just say to do, add image here. Now below all of this, I want to add our little arrow there. So I'm going to start by just adding a wrapping div. And this is going to come from React icons. So like I mentioned earlier, if I just type in fi arrow, we'll kind of see the different icons that I can get. And I want fi arrow right. This is just going to use, or you can just use this like a normal component like this. And now we should have some content here. Let me just actually make this color lighter so you can see what's happening here. Say text white, start. Cool, so now we have some content. Sweet, this is a great start. I'm gonna come back up to our a tag right here. And this is probably gonna be the most in-depth piece of kind of this styling. This has a whole bunch of different class names on it. The first piece that I wanna actually add is group. And that's because we're going to be using like kind of group states. So like whenever I hover over the entire link, I want to use group stylings to make like, lighten this arrow and this text and stuff. And I can use that or do all of that using group stylings, which if you haven't seen that before, I guess that is another thing that we'll be learning today. So just add group right here. You're not going to see any classes pop up. This is kind of a TailwindCSS thing. You're not going to see any classes pop up if you hover over it, but that will allow me to come down here and say like class name. Now I can do like group dash hover and then say whatever, text red 500 or something like that. And this hover state will be based on this outer class name. Actually, you could probably see that now. So yeah, see now if I hover over the entire group, anywhere on the group, it's going to affect those styles. So pretty cool, but that's the basics of that. After that, I'm going to add a position of relative. I'm going to give this a display of flex and items of center, which is like a line item center. I'm going to give it a justify between like this. And I just realized I removed that text white, which I did not want to do. So I'll add that back so we can actually see what's happening. Nice, so now we have some kind of our stuff spreading across the screen like this. I'm gonna give this a border. So we'll say border B, so border bottom of 2. We'll give it a border of neutral 700 is what I picked last time. Going to give it padding on the y-axis of 4. Going to add a transition of colors because whenever we hover this, I'm going to use just normal CSS or Tailwind CSS to do the kind of color transitions. I'm going to give it a duration of 500. Sorry if this is going a little bit quickly, but I just want to get through this piece. That's just going to add our transition duration, set that to 500 milliseconds, so just slow it down a little bit. And then finally, I'm going to add at medium because I said I want to kind of make this responsive. I'm going to increase the padding on the y-axis to 8. So let's see how that works. Cool, sweet. So now we have a border. This is not just going to be white in a second, but we also have our padding and everything, and this should have a little bit of responsiveness to it. So as it gets bigger, there we go. See when it gets up to this point, gets a little bit larger. So looking nice. One other thing that I did not mention actually is that we also want a hover state for this. So whenever I hover over any of these links, I want the underline to get lighter. So we can just say hover. And whenever I hover, I want to set border to neutral. And what neutral did I pick last time? Neutral 50. Okay, cool. So all the way to as light as it can be. So whenever we hover, border neutral. Now, as I hover over this, we'll see that all of the borders kind of get lighter. Takes 500 milliseconds. Looks really nice. Now, before I add the rest of these styles, I am going to remove this text white on the outer wrapping container right here because I do not want text whites. I will come down and define these individually for each of these different spans and everything, starting with this top one. So on my first span for my heading, I will give this a class name. I'll give it a position of relative, which we will see why in a little bit. I'm going to give it a z index of 10 because whenever we get to adding that image, let's see, make this bigger again. Whenever we get to adding this little image, that's possible that this image goes behind our text. So I want to add a relative position and make sure that the image always stays behind our text instead of floating back in front of it, which would obscure the text, obviously. Going to give this a display of block so that these stack on top of each other. I'm going to give this a text of 4XL to start, so just like a font size of 4XL. I'm going to give it a font of bold. Give it a text of neutral 500, not 600, 500. Starting to come together a little bit. I'm going to add those same transition properties that I added earlier. So transition colors, give it a duration again of 500. At medium, again, just for the responsiveness, I want to increase the text size a little bit. So we'll say text 6XL. And then finally, I just want to add a group hover state like I mentioned a second ago. So whenever you hover over the group, which is anywhere on top of this entire A tag, I want to lighten up the text. So instead of text neutral, whenever you hover over the group, we're going to go with, let's see, text, what did I do last time? Neutral 50. Nice, so all the way lightened up. Let's see how that looks. Now, as I hover over it, I just realized that this should actually be 500, not 600, so that was not going to work for the duration. Sorry, that was the duration that I just fixed right there. Now, as I hover over this, we're going to see that each get lighter and darker, so it looks nice. Now, coming down to our subheading, a lot of these are going to look very similar. So we'll say class name for our subheading. This also needs a position of relative, just so that we can set a z index again of 10. I'm going to set a margin top of 2. Going to set a position of block. I'm going to set actually I don't even need to set that, ignore that piece. We want a text of neutral 500 for this as well. To start, we're going to set the same transition properties. So transition colors, we will set a duration of 500. It's getting a little bit repetitive, but you get the idea here. And then on group hover, oops, it should help if I actually look at my screen. On group hover, again, we're going to change the text to neutral 50. Sweet. Now that I'm thinking about it, I guess we probably could have raised this some of these classes up a level or two, but I'm going to leave them as they are for now. But point being, now as we hover each one of these, looking pretty good. One thing that's not looking pretty good is we still can't see our little arrow over here, so let's go ahead and fix that really quick. Really quick, on the wrapping div, I'm just going to set a position of relative, a z index of 10, and I'm going to give this a padding of 4. That's just going to push it from the right a little bit. And then down on my arrow, we will say class name. Equal to text 5XL is what looked good to this for this to me. And this can just immediately go to text neutral 50. Now that should pop up over there on the right. Sweet. To make this bigger, that will look a little bit less ridiculous. But remember, this is just going to pop in whenever we've actually finished our animation. Make this a little bit bigger. That is just going to pop in from the right side. So that's not always going to be visible like that. And that is going to be it for all of our basic stylings. Now we can jump over to adding an image and doing that cool kind of mouse effect and making this kind of come in from the right side, as well as doing that kind of cool little staggered animation with the text. So the very first piece of the actual animation that we're going to set up is going to be what is probably the easiest piece, and that's just actually making this little arrow pop in from the right side. So back over in our reference, if I go like this, you'll see that the arrow kind of comes in from over here. We're just going to set that up really quick. Before I do that really quick, my OCD is killing me having this white space at the bottom. So I'm going to come up to the top here and just set a min height of screen so that this takes up the full screen. Sweet. All right. Now I am not going absolutely crazy every time that I look at this. But so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to come down here to, actually that's a lie. The first thing that we're going to do is come up to Framer Motion, and we're going to import motion from Framer Motion. And this is the kind of like the base building block of how Framer Motion works. If you have absolutely no idea how Framer Motion works at all, we can just do a little quick demo of that. So I'm going to come down to my div right here. And essentially all that you have to do is type in motion dot. And then for any of your normal CSS, or not CSS, your normal HTML elements, you can prepend them with motion dot like this. So if this was an A tag, that would work. If this was a span or whatever it might be, that would work. And this is going to give you access to a bunch of extra props that you can define directly on your elements to declaratively declare your animations. I'm not going to do, we'll kind of circle back in just a second to how this is actually going to work, but just to show you a basic example of this, what I could say is something like, say, initial, and this initial prop is going to be the initial state of my component. Maybe we'll do like rotate or something, and say rotate 0 degrees, and then we could do something like while hover or something. Maybe we want to rotate it 90 degrees. So that should work. If I come over here now, sweet. Now we see that whenever I hover just over this little arrow right here, it's going to rotate. That will do the same for all of these, obviously. But what we actually want, obviously, is not the rotation, but we also don't want this just to work whenever I hover directly over the arrow. We want to have an animation anytime that I hover over anywhere in the card. So once again, back over in my example, if I hover over here, just kind of like watch this part of the animation. If I hover anywhere in the card, I want to see this pop out from the right side. Now, the way that we're going to do that is using something called variance. Technically, I'm defining variance right here, but we can kind of waterfall variance down through our elements. So like I could define our different interactions up here on our wrapping class, or on our wrapping HTML element rather, and then have whatever happens to our wrapping element bubble down to our inner elements. So that sounds a little bit confusing. I'll just kind of give you a basic example right here. So I'm going to come up to our A tag up here, and I'm also going to turn this, instead of just an A, into a motion, motion.a, so motion anchor tag. And I will take what I have here, I will remove it, and I will move it up here. Only I don't actually want to define this as like my different properties that I want to set. I just want to set some kind of string that I can then key off of. You'll see what I mean in a second. So for initial, I'm just going to call this initial. You could call this, whatever you want. If you want to call this banana, that would also work. I just like to stick with whatever the actual variant name is, just because it's a little bit easier. So then for the same thing. So for while hover, I'm also going to set that to while hover. And now this isn't going to do anything anymore, obviously, because we're not defining any animations. But what I can then do is come down under my motion div right here and define a prop called variance, like this. And any keys, so long as they map to whatever's happening up here inside of this object, will be applied. That might have not been the most eloquent way to say that, but for example, my initial state, so this initial right here maps to this initial right here. If instead it was banana, then it would be applied whenever the banana key was up here. We'll keep it as initial though. And the actual styles that I want to set this as are an X, so like an X transform of 25% is what I did originally, and an opacity of 0. Let's give that a shot. Let's refresh, because sometimes I need to do that. Sweet, and now it looks like it disappeared. Opacity 0, it's just kind of over to the right now. And now obviously we want to make that pop up. So we'll just take all of this code that we just wrote right here, add a new line, and our while hover variant is called while hover. So I will change my my key here for the second one. I'll give it an X of 0% and an opacity of 1. And now we should see that as we hover over each one of our links, it pops out from the side. So this looks really, really nice. Now there's a couple of other things that you can do as well in terms of defining the easing and the duration and things like that. And that's going to be in a transition prop. So I can go transition, and I could say, for instance, I want my duration to be 0.5 seconds, and I could set an easing, just like a normal CSS easing if you're used to those. So I could say like back and out, maybe. I like this one a lot generally, so let's see how that works. Now we'll see that the speed and like not the direction, but the easing is the right word, I guess, but the motion with which it kind of uses to animate in and out is going to look a little bit different. Now, what I've kind of like for these ones is, or for the specific example, is spring easing, or like kind of spring physics, which are built in by default with framer motion. I can also come in here and just define them as a prop. So instead of an easing, you'll go type, and then you'll say spring. If I save that, now we'll kind of see it comes in a little bit slowly, and it like kind of has this little kind of like rubber bandy effect. That's kind of the spring physics. You can dial those in a little bit more. I'm not going to go super deep into the specifics of how you define like tension and everything else that you can define with spring easing, but for now, we'll just leave it at this, and we will call that good for the first piece of our animation. So the next part of this animation that I actually want to piece together is kind of like this thing that's happening over here on the left with the title, where it kind of like moves to the left and then one letter at a time kind of shifts back to the right. This is going to be building kind of off of what we just learned a second ago about variants, but we're going to add one extra little twist, which is staggerChildren. We're going to do some kind of fancy stuff here in a second. Really quick before I do that though, I realize that I have a little bit of an overflow here. That's happening because whenever we're moving these arrows to the right, they're flowing off the side of the screen. We can fix that by coming up to our wrapping anchor tag and just giving this an overflow X of hidden. And that should kind of fix those scroll bars. Hopefully you guys could see that and it wasn't cropped off in the video. But now we don't have an overflow problem. So if I try to scroll to the right, it's not going to scroll over. Much better. My OCD is much happier. So anyways, the next piece of this is going to be, I'm going to go ahead and close this up so it gets out of my way, is to come up to our heading right here. And we can start off by just turning this into a motion.span instead of a normal span. Now this is also going to have variants. I'll actually open this back up again really quick, similar to the way that these variants worked. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these really quick, just so we can kind of have a good starting point. Come down, drop this in here. And the first part of this animation is going to be translating on the x-axis. So we'll start initially at 0, which is kind of the base state. And then whenever we hover anywhere on this card, we want to move on the x-axis to the left. So we want to move the entire block of text. If I look again at our example, it looks like this. See how all of the letters at the same time kind of move over to the left? I'm going to do that on this kind of parent selector. So I'm going to say X, and we'll just go -16. So flip back over here. And now you see how whenever I hover over like this, it kind of moves over to the left. I actually did just realize that overflow is now going to affect this. So I'm actually going to take that overflow hidden that I just added, which is right here. And you remove that. I'm actually going to move this up to our section tag right here. Go like that. And that will fix our kind of weird little problem that we had there. So that looks a little bit better. But we get the idea now. So we get, whenever we hover over one of these, it's going to move the text over to the left. Now we can also start adding our transition onto this span that we had here. And we can just start with the exact same thing we did a second ago. I'll just define spring as my kind of transition type. Oops, that's not where I wanted to click enter. Go like this. We'll probably see a little bit of a difference now. Yep, now we get that kind of basic little spring easing. But how do we actually add our kind of individual letter animations? Well, we can't really do that as is at the moment because all of our text is just being inserted in line like this. So, you know, for all of them, it's kind of just like about, just directly dropping it in. What we actually want is individual spans with each letter. So maybe we want like A, and then B, and then O, and then U, and then T. So we're gonna have to kind of JavaScript our way around this, if this makes sense. But this way we can define animations for each one of these individual spans and kind of give them different, make it so that they run at different times, and that will give us kind of what we're looking for here. So I will undo all of this because we actually don't want to do it manually. What we want to do is we want to take our heading and turn this into an array. So the easiest way to do this is just to say .split, and split's going to need a string on where you want to separate by. So if you wanted to separate by spaces, you would go like this. If you wanted to separate by the letter Z, you go like this. And if you just leave an empty string like this, it will split each letter into an individual character inside of an array. So I want to say .split. And then I want to map over each character or each letter. So I'll say, actually like this, say for each letter, I want to run some function. Not only do I want the letter, but I also want the index, which you're going to get in the second parameter of this callback function if you're not familiar with map, just so I can pass that as the key to each one of my spans. Now we can actually start defining, actually let's just do a basic example just so we can see that this still renders as we expect. So if I just pass in the letter, and then I say key is equal to I, click save, and and actually return this, sorry. I'm like sitting here like, why is this not working? Now we're gonna see that all of this actually kind of works here, where it all looks exactly as we expect it to. So it doesn't look like we're doing anything fancy. We don't have to add like a flexbox or anything like that. One thing that we will need to do so that we can actually add our transforms, which I'll show you in a second, is add a class name of inline block. Save that again. It's not going to look like anything changed, but that's just going to allow us to add transforms, which we're going to need to do in order to have this little kind of wavy effect. To start actually applying that, I'm going to come above my class names right here, and I am going to drop in, we can just copy one more time, our variants from up here. And the only change that we really need to make here is we need to change our -16 into a +16. So whatever the opposite of this right here is. If I also take our transition, we're going to use the exact same thing, drop that on our span, click save. And now it should look like it's not moving at all. And the reason that it's not moving at all is one piece of this animation is trying to move everything to the left, 16 pixels, while the other piece of our animation is moving everything to the right, 16 pixels. So what we can actually do to kind of see the difference in that is add some delay. And you can either do that down here in your transition. So I could say like delay, say 0.25 seconds like this. And now you're going to see that it kind of goes left to right and does some kind of funky stuff, which that works, but that's actually not how we want to define it. We want to define it using our transition prop up here, because this is kind of the parent transition to all of these motion spans. And we can add specifically like children-based delays and staggers if you're defining it on the parent. Okay, I said that really poorly, but I'll just show you what I mean. So I can say something like delay children instead of just delay, and I can add my 0.25 up here. And then I can also add, and this is kind of like where the magic comes in here, I can add a property called staggerChildren. And what this is going to give you is a delay between each of the children. So the first letter will run immediately, essentially. And then for however long you base it here, so if you said 1 second, it will wait 1 second between each of the child spans before it runs the animation for those. So if I save it 1, that's going to look ridiculous probably. It's going to take like forever. Yep, see, it's like kind of slowly doing one at a time as I hover over it. That's way too long. The number that I found looked nice for this was 0.075. Click save on that. And that should give you something that looks a little more fluid like this. And that's pretty much it. That's this piece of the animation. You can do all kinds of other cool kind of effects like this. You'll actually find a couple of different examples of me doing something close to this across the Hover website. But if you wanted to play around with like rotating each of the letters or changing their colors or making them bounce up and down or like adding keyframes or something like that, where you say 16 and then 20, whatever, minus 16 again, whatever. You can kind of play around and get some really, really cool stuff where each letter is individually animating separately of each other, if that makes sense. But yeah, so now let's go ahead and jump over to the last piece of this, which will be the image effect right here. Now onto the most fun part of this whole project, in my opinion, which is the image piece, like this little kind of floating guy. Notice really quick that as I move my mouse across and up and down, this image is going to move kind of in the opposite direction to where my mouse is moving. So that's what we're working towards. It's also going to have this little kind of hover or this kind of grow and spin animation on hover, which is going to work the exact same way using the same kind of variant technique as these other pieces of the animation. So we can go ahead and just place this and add that piece of the animation first, and then the mouse move piece is going to be quite a bit more involved. So we'll start with what we already know and then build upon that. Right where I have my little to-do right here, I'm going to remove that. And I'm going to just start this off as a motion.image. We'll start it like that just because we already kind of know what we're working towards now. We can add our source, so our image source. And remember, we're passing that in up here as image source as one of our props. So we'll just drop that in under our source. We're probably going to want some kind of alt text. I'm just going to copy what I had earlier instead of fumbling over writing this. You might want to have, be taking this in as a prop as well, so you can add a more specific alt tag for each one of these. I just went with this just for sake of speed, but this is kind of the basics of this. If we save that, it should pop up somewhere. It's going to look really stupid, obviously, so now we actually have to style it. We'll add some class names. Oops, class name. I want to give this a position of absolute so that I can absolutely position it. Remember, up here on our wrapping div, we have a position of relative. Let me also close this so that's not in the way. But our outer anchor tag has a position of relative, so this will be absolutely positioned to our anchor tag. Up here, I'm going to add a z-index of 0. Remember, I've been adding the z-indexes of 10 everywhere else. That's so that everything else sits on top of our image here. So add a z of 0. I'm going to give it a height of 24 is what looked good last time. That is 96 pixels. I'll add a width of 32. These are not specific to this effect. You can totally play around with these numbers, but this is what looked good for me. I'm going to give this a border radius, so rounded LG. I'm going to give it an object fit of cover, so we're not distorting our images and making them look all weird. And then finally, I am going to make the image a little bit bigger on larger screens. So I'll say at medium, I want to give this a height of 48. And at medium, I also want to give it a width of 64. So if I save that, it should be up in the top left. It is sitting behind all of our text, so that's good. That's a good start, but it obviously is only a little bit of the way there. So let's add the rest of the fun stuff. Come back over here. Did not mean to do that. One thing that we're going to need to do is position this to start kind of somewhere near the middle of our screen. We'll play around with exactly where in a minute, but I'm actually going to do this using style tags. And I am doing this because we are actually going to be passing in kind of dynamic values in a minute, as well as our translate, like any kind of transform values that we pass in, we're going to need to do in style tags, or you're going to kind of sometimes get some weird effects when using framer motion. If you ever run into that where you're like, why isn't this kind of translate or transform or rotate or something not applying the way I suspect that it should be, it's probably because you need to pass it in via style tags instead of via like class names or like normal kind of CSS. But that's kind of beyond the scope of this. We'll just go ahead and knock it out this way anyways. So what I want to do, I'm just going to start by centering this image. So I'll say, give this a top of 50%, and then we're going to give it a left of 50%. So that's going to move our top left corner of each of our images to the middle, but I actually want to have the image itself in the middle. So to do that, I'm actually going to copy these down. I'm going to give it a translate X of minus 50% and a translate Y also of minus 50%. And this is kind of like a I mean, if you've been writing HTML and CSS for a long time, you've probably seen something similar to this, but this is like a way to actually center things directly in the middle of a div. So if you ever wanted to know how to center something, here's one kind of hacky workaround way to do it. But now we have everything centered. What I also want to do is start with kind of what we already know, which is how to do animations on hover. So we can do that by, let's just grab some of our code that we have a minute ago, like our variants, grab our variants, close up this div again, come down onto our motion tag here. And I don't want exactly these same styles, so I'll just delete these. What I actually want is an initial of a scale of 0 and a rotation of, what did I have last time? Minus 12.5 degrees. Play around with these numbers. You can also add opacity and whatever else you might want to add, but this is just what we're going to do for now. Then whenever we hover over our wrapping anchor tag, I want to move scale to 1 and rotate to 12.5 degrees. Now we should see that everything goes away. And then as I hover, each of the images kind of pops up right in the middle. And this on its own is a pretty cool effect. I'm also going to add our spring transition. So let's just copy that. We can actually copy it from down here. Just grab this so we have the same kind of transition as on everything else. And then we can just drop that below our style tag. Click save. And now this should have that same kind of slow, springy animation that we're getting everywhere else. So that looks pretty nice. Now to actually do kind of the most fun part of this, which is making it kind of follow our mouse a little bit. And this is going to be a little bit more in depth. I'm actually going to close up all of this stuff. We're going to come back to our styles right here in a minute. But before we get to that, we're going to have to do a little bit of kind of fancy JavaScript stuff up here. If you watched a video I made a couple of weeks ago on the kind of like little mouse hover card, it's going to look almost exactly the same as kind of the code that we wrote for that, for tracking mouse position. If not, absolutely don't worry about it. We're obviously going to go over it right now, but just to say that if you have watched a couple of my recent videos, you might have seen something that looks kind of like this. The first thing that we need to do is add a reference to our outer anchor tag here, and that's just going to be using useRef, which is a hook from React. So I'll just write that and kind of explain as I go. We'll say const ref is equal to useRef, and then we can import that from React. And this can just be initialized as null, and we can pass this into our anchor tag, saying ref is equal to ref. Now, what this is going to let us do is, in tandem with adding a function for onMouseMove to this anchor tag, it's going to let us get the kind of size of this anchor tag as it sits on the screen, and then compare that with where our mouse is relative to the rest of the screen. That's a little bit of a mouthful, so let's just jump in a little bit further and actually start writing some of this code. Like I said, we're going to want some kind of we're going to say onMouse, move right there. We're going to want to run some kind of function. We'll just call it handle mouse move. That does not exist yet. Copy this, add a couple of lines, say const handle mouse move. There we go. This is going to take in an event, which it will pass it, which will have some of the information that we need. And let's just start by console logging hello world. Nice. If I open up my console really quick, clear all of this, I'll make this a little bit bigger. Now we'll see that as I move my mouse around, so I stopped, it's going to continue to give me these individual hello worlds until I kind of move my mouse off of one of the links. And that's how we know this is working the way that we want it to work. Now, obviously, I don't just want to be console logging over and over again, so I'm going to remove that. What I actually want to be able to do is I want to be able to get the position of the mouse as it pertains to this box. So like as it pertains to each one of the links. So like, the box for this about link goes from down here to probably right up here, and then all the way over to the right. So if I'm down at the bottom right, I want to know I'm down at the bottom right. Up at the bottom left, I want to know I'm there, and then anywhere in between. And the way that we're going to be able to do this is by comparing the position of our mouse on the screen with the position of where this kind of box is, or this link is on the screen. I'm just going to start pulling out some of the numbers so we can kind of see this coming together, because it is pretty hard to just kind of explain all at once. So the first numbers that we're going to need are the width and the height of the rectangle that makes up each one of these boxes. So the way that we're going to get that is using this ref that we defined a minute ago. It's kind of what I was trying to get at there. And we can just say const rect for a rectangle is what I'll normally call it, and set that equal to ref.current.get bounding client rect. That is going to give us it's going to give us a bunch of stuff actually. We can just go ahead and console log this. We'll say console log rect, like that. Let's see what that gives us. Move this around a little bit, open one of these up, open this up. And this is all of the kind of different dimensions of this anchor, or of this element that we were just hovering over. Now we're going to care about a couple of different things here. We're going to care about the width and the height of this box, as well as the top and the left position of this box. Now the width and the height I think are pretty self-explanatory, but the left and the top position are going to tell you what the left side of this box, like where that is on the screen. So right now it's 16 pixels from the far left side of the screen, and the top of this box is, what does it say there? 244. So I guess I was probably hovering one of these ones down here. But the top section of the box is going to be 244 pixels from the top of the screen. Now there's a little bit of other information which we're also going to need to know here, which is where the mouse actually is. Now we can use this information in tandem with a little bit of other information, which I guess I'll also just console log out really quick. And that information is where the mouse is on the screen. So let's just log that out. We can get that off of the event as well, or not as well. I guess the other piece we got off of that ref. I could say event dot client X and event dot client Y, and this is going to give me the X and Y coordinates of where my mouse is on the screen. So I'll clear this out. Now as I move, let's see if I go all the way up to the top left, it's somewhere pretty close to 0, 0 as I'm like up here. Well, I mean, I guess I'm not gonna be able to get exactly to 0, 0 because I'm only able to get up to the top left of this little box right here. But if I were to be all the way up here and had the listener on the window, it would be 0, 0. And then all the way down here, it's going to be full width and height of my window that I have right here. Now we can use all of these numbers kind of smashed together to figure out where our mouse is in as relative to the box that we're currently hovering. So the way that we're going to do that is first pulling out the width and the height from the rect that we mentioned a second ago. So we'll just define those. We'll say const width is equal to rect.width, and then const height is equal to rect.height. You could also just destructure these if you wanted. Now to figure out our mouse X and Y, we can subtract the mouse position, like the client X and Y, from our rectangle's top and left sides. So it's gonna look something like const mouse X is equal to event.client X, minus rectangle. Man, I am really struggling here. Rectangle.left. And conversely for mouse Y, we'll do event.client Y, so our Y position on the screen, minus rectangle.top. So I'll add a login to actually log out these numbers to kind of see what this is going to give us. I already ran this a little bit, but now we're going to see that as I hover over any of these. So like if I come all the way up to the top left, notice also I'm not using my width and my height yet. This is just based off my mouse X and Y. All the way at the top left is going to get pretty close to 0, 0. And if I go over to the bottom right, it'll be like full width, full height of the entire container. And that's 95% of what we want. But what I actually want is to turn this into some kind of percentage. So I want to be able to know that I am 0% of the way down, like as I'm at the top left, I'm at 0%, 0%. If I'm all the way over at the right in the bottom, the bottom right corner, I'm at 100% of the way across and 100% of the way down. Now the way that we can do that is, I'm gonna go ahead and remove this one more time, is by just dividing our mouse's position over our width or over our height. So we'll say like const x% is equal to mouse X divided by width like this. And then we can get our Y%, and we could do that as mouse Y divided by height like this. I'm gonna console log those out so we can see them. Console.log x%, Y%. Now this should give us a value between 0 and 1. So all the way at the top right, we're right about 0, 0. All the way at the top left, sorry. At the bottom right, we're right around 1, 1. Pretty dang close. If I could get it right on the exact pixel, it would give me 1, 1. Now, because of something that we'll see in just a second, I actually like to kind of squish this into -5 to, or -0.5 to 0.5. That way the middle value, like if you're right at the middle, is 0. And it's just a little bit easier to kind of comprehend a couple of things in my head at least. So what I'm also going to do is, instead of just doing all of this, I'm also going to subtract 0.5, and that, 0.5, and that's going to give me a final value of somewhere between -0.5 and 0.5. And this is great. So this is kind of getting the numbers that we want, but we also need to store these numbers somewhere. Normally you would use like a use state or something, but we actually want to use what's called a motion value, which is kind of Framer Motion's own kind of way of storing numbers as state. We're going to need that because we're going to need to transform this number of -0.5 to 0.5 into like a percentage for where our top and left for our images are. And that's only going to take in a motion value. Now, the way that we can just store those is using something called use motion value, which is going to work kind of like use state. Just come up under my ref here and I'll start writing these out so you can see how these work. And say const x is what we'll define the first one as. It's equal to use motion value. That'll import from Framer Motion, and we can just define that as 0. Now this kind of goes back to why I like my percentages down here to be between -0.5 and 0.5, because that means that the center, or like the kind of like null value right in the middle, is just 0, and it's a little bit easier to kind of default something to 0 in my head at least, versus having to default everything to 0.5, and then maybe you come back a month later and you're like, why is this defaulted to 0.5? That seems confusing. So yeah, we'll just default each of these like this. Notice that this isn't going to give you like a set state, like, you know, you're not also going to get set x out of this like in use state. Instead, it's just going to be an object which has some methods on it for setting and getting values. So I could say like x.set, and then pass that in our X%, and then same with Y. Let me scroll down a little bit so you can see what I'm doing here. And I'll say Y.set Y%. Now we're actually storing both of our values in some kind of state, and we can close up our function right here. Now, it isn't particularly useful to us to be able to just have kind of our numbers as they are, because what we want this to be able to do is we want to be able to pass this into our top and left values in our style right here. And we want these to be able to kind of move in accordance with where our mouse is, right? So like as I move to the right, I want it to move this image somewhere. As I move to the left, up and down. Like I want to adjust this, I want to be able to say, okay, now it's 20% and 70%. And then, obviously it moved, but not according to my mouse, but that's kind of what we want to be able to do. We want to be able to have a percentage and not just this straight number. So the way that we can do that is using a hook called useTransform. UseTransform also comes from FramerMotion. And what that's going to do is it's going to take in a motion value and it's going to transform it into some other output value, which a little bit confusing, but we'll just start walking through it. So we'll say, first I want to define my top, let's say, my top value. And I'm going to set that equal to useTransform. This is going to first take in our motion value. So for our top, we want to know our Y value. So I'm passing in this Y right here. Then I'm going to give it a range of inputs. For mine, I'm going to say 0.5 to minus 0.5. You can do it the other way if it's a little more intuitive to you. But because we want this to kind of be reversed, so as I move to the left, I want the image to move to the right. As I move to the right, I want the image to move to the left. You're going to have one of these values look like it's kind of reversed. Not a big deal though. Point just being, I want this to be from 0.5 to minus 0.5. And I want those values to map to, let's see what I did earlier. I did 40% to 60%. So at a value of 0.5, it's going to transform that into a number of 45%. At 0, so like the default, it'll be right in the middle of those, which is 50%, which is kind of what we want our default to be. And then at at minus 0.5, it's going to be at 60%. A little easier to see than it is to kind of say out loud. So I'm just going to take my top value here and replace my 50% hard-coded number here with that top. Just remove that. Can also remove my console logging here. And now we should see that as I move my mouse up and down, my image also moves up and down. So you see that it's like, it's not having that same kind of springy effect. We'll get to that in a second. But as I move up and down, my mouse is moving opposite kind of accordingly. So let's add Y, which is just going to be, or not Y, but our left value rather. And it's just going to be the exact kind of opposite of all of this. So we're just going to change this to X, change this to left. And I've also, you could keep these percentages the same if you wanted to, but I found that 60% to 70% looks a little bit better just because it's going to keep the image a little bit further over to the right and away from the text. But again, you can play with all these numbers if you want. That said, just going to take my left, remove my 50% here. So we're actually passing in our left. You could also do this if you wanted, but you can omit that second piece. Click save. And now it should be following our mouse everywhere. So this is almost everything. If I'm all the way at the bottom right, it's going to move to the left and up. All the way at the top left, it's going to move right and down. Now, I do want to add some kind of spring animation. Everything else looks nice and springy and organic. And this is kind of just moving around like linearly with my mouse. But we can actually fix this. And all we have to do is pass our value that we get back from our motion value before passing it into our useTransform into another hook called useSpring. So I'll show you how that works. Say mouse X, or we can even just say XSpring, I guess. XSpring is fine. Is equal to useSpring. useSpring comes from FramerMotion, and we'll pass in X. Now we'll take that, replace our X right here with it. Now let's do the same thing one more time, but for Y. So we'll say YSpring is equal to useSpring Y. Replace Y with it. And this should magically kind of give us what looks a little bit more like springy organic easing, right? So now as I move, scroll on a little bit so you can see a little bit better. As I move, it kind of still has that like organic, like rubber band like effect as it gets to the end. It'll like move a little bit. It'll continue moving after my mouse stops, which I think looks really, really nice. And that is going to be it for this one, guys. So here, let me make it a little bit bigger so we can actually see it, not kind of scaled down on the more mobile-like screens. So everything's scaled up a little bit more. I will call out one more time that all of this code is available on my website. Totally free for this component. Just come over and click code. If you want it in TypeScript again, I know I've already said this like 3 times, so don't hate me, but you can come over and grab this. Bunch of other cool stuff I'll let you guys explore. But, like if you're wanting to learn other cool animations and stuff, you can come over here and find a bunch of other cool stuff and break down how it works. Anyways, that's going to be it for this one, guys. I will see you next time, and peace.